Hello everyone, I'm here to do the last recommendation video of my backlisted project, and if you haven't seen those videos, I've made a series of videos of backlisted books that I think are interesting because I want to promote backlisted books rather than always the newest, most exciting book that just came out. So I have been doing this by decades, and today is the 2010 to 2019 decade, so it's the last one. We are in 2021, so that's what it is. So yeah, let's just get into the books. First one I want to recommend is actually I have a physical book of, and that's the Book of Strange New Things by Michel Faber, Michel Faber, I think. And this is a very interesting story. It's in the future, it's kind of sci-fi, but not really sci-fi. It's about this man that goes to this new planet because I think he's an anthropologist or something like that. And he wants to go make contact with this new civilization they found in this world. And he kind of learns about that civilization and learns about himself as well from that interaction. And yeah, I mean, it is very sci-fi. It's about going to another planet and meeting aliens, but it's not really about that. It's very literary, and it explores basically the assumptions that humans have about life and also capitalism, because there is this company that went to this world to exploit their resources, and that's kind of how this interaction with the aliens started and what implications that does have in the life with the aliens that someone came. It's kind of colonialism, but in another planet, and explores all of the issues with colonialism in this other planet. And I think it was brilliant. It was really immersive. It's not short, but it was easy to read, and still it was very thoughtful. And I'm looking forward to read this at some point because I really enjoyed it. The next one I have to recommend is something that I think a lot of people in BookTube have already loved, and that is Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. This is his memoir of growing up in South Africa. And he's just really funny. He's a really funny person, but also really smart. And I would recommend the audiobook of this one because he narrates it himself, and it's always nice to hear his stories from himself, but also because there is an Osha language and he pronounces it right and all of that kind of stuff. And yeah, I think it's one of those things that you can just listen to or read and immerse yourself, and it's heartwarming, but it's also really insightful into what society at that time in South Africa was, because at that time Trevor Noah was born at the end of apartheid, so it was not legal for him to exist because he was a mixed race kid. And he talks about that, but he also talks just about the fact that he was a mixed race kid in a majoritarily black community and how that made him different, and how, I don't know, things like his grandma was afraid of beating him like the rest of the kids. It's very normal in these kind of places to just be physical with your kids when you're trying to teach them, not in a violent way, but just in a loving way. I don't know. It's part of the culture, I guess. But his grandma, Trevor Noah's grandma, was afraid of that because he will have bruises and she will feel like that she didn't know how his body worked because he was a lot lighter than the other kids that she had around. Things like that are really cool to learn. And I mean, Trevor Noah is a cool person, so it's always good to learn something more about a person that you admire. The next one I have is another non-fiction, and that is Vagina by Naomi. This one it's, as I said, a non-fiction about the vagina. So basically, it's a feminist work that gives the tools for women to empower themselves in their sexual life, but also in general, and how having a vagina, it's not something that makes you like deserve less things, which is obvious. But yeah, I think that the way that Naomi Wolf vocalizes these things are really interesting. And I mean, I would recommend this to any woman, but also to men, because I think that many men do not know how the women's body work, and there's a lot of that in this book, like actual scientific knowledge about women's bodies. And I think that's also important to know for men how vagina works, how periods work, that kind of thing. So yeah, I would recommend this one as well. The next one I have is Once Upon a Time in the East by Xiaolu Guo, and this is another memoir. This one is about Xiaolu Guo, who is a Chinese woman, and this was written in English, so this is not her first language, but still the way that she writes is very beautiful. And she basically was born in this little fishing village in China, and she she lived with her grandparents, and her grandparents were very uneducated, and so she grew in this community in which she didn't go to school, and for a very long time she didn't even know her own name or the name of her grandparents, because nobody ever called them that. And how she eventually goes back to the city and studies art and becomes an artist and moves to the UK. And in that process, of course, there is also the Tiananmen Square revolution and all of those things. So it is quite. It's something really interesting that I never read. I never really read that much about China in this way, and I think this is a very good one to explore China better. And it's very insightful, so I would really recommend if you're into memoirs. The next one I have is When I Hit You by Meena Kandasamy, and this one is a very heart-wrenching book. So this one it's a sort of a novel, but it's inspired by things that happen in the author's life, and it describes how you get trapped into an abusive relationship. So this woman met this professor, and they fell in love, and everything was fine, and they got married, and then he started being very possessive. And she thought that she never would be that kind of woman because she was educated and she was very self-aware and she was feminist and all that. So she was like, yeah, I know what my rights are. I'm never going to be in that position. And then she finds herself in that position, and it's about all of her thoughts around this situation and the fact that she wants to escape, but also the doubts that are around that. And it's brutal, but it's also very, very insightful into how people get trapped in these situations. And you always think that that's never going to happen to you, and then it happens. So yeah, I think that's a brilliant, brilliant book. It's also very well written. I think it was nominated for the Booker one year. But yeah, it was really good and really impactful. So again, recommend. The next one I read actually last year and I loved it, and that's Disoriental by Negar Djavadi. It was in my list of best books of the year that I read. And this one is Negar Djavadi is a Iranian French author, and she describes also similar to her life. A woman that lived in Iran, and then after the revolution, her family flew into France, and she grew up in France. This woman grew up in France, and the culture balance that she has to do because she's an immigrant, so she has the history of her family, and she's proud of that. But at the same time, she's French in many ways, Also, she discusses a lot about gender and the different approaches of gender in different countries. And it's brilliant. It's so brilliant. It talks also a lot about how when you move from your original culture, you kind of lose part of yourself in the process. Because as much as you don't want to, you cannot, if you want to live in a society and be integrated in a society, you cannot be the same person that you were when you lived in your original society. So it talks a lot about immigration and how that affects people personally. And yeah, as I said, brilliant, brilliant book. The next one is a novel called The Buddha in the Attic by Julie Otsuka. And this one is about the Japanese concentration camps in the US during Second World War. It's a very weirdly told novel because it's in first plural person, so we. I think, if I remember correctly. And we is this group of women, Japanese women, that were shipped into America. Yeah, so these women arrived to the US and they're supposed to be these nice brides. And then like all of the thing with the concentration camps for Japanese happens, and they have to kind of hide there. Yeah, it's a really small book. It's like 100 pages or a little bit more than 100 pages, but it's really, really brilliant. And it explores topics that, again, I have not seen a lot written of in a really interesting way, literary-wise and also culture-wise. The next book is another non-fiction, and that's Inferior by Angela Saini. And this, I could have also said Superior by Angela Saini. So Inferior is about how science has been trying to justify that women are inferior and how that is not true, basically. And then the other book, Superior, is how science has been trying to justify racism and that also didn't work out. But yeah, basically, Inferior, it's about all the data that suggests that women are inferior in any way and how it has been debunked over and over again. And how we should just accept that that is not true scientifically, which I think hopefully many people kind of do, but I think there's still this subconscious that we are different and how that is not really scientific. So yeah, that one is it's an interesting one if you are interested in gender dynamics and things like that. And then the last one I want to recommend is The Embassy of Cambodia by Zadie Smith. Zadie Smith, I find it's an author that many people struggle with, me included. Some books of her I love, some books of hers I hate, and I think that's a common thing that people have. And this one, if you are scared about Zadie Smith because of that, and this one is a really short novella, and it's kind of about this woman that cleans in the Embassy of Cambodia in London and some like day-to-day things that she goes through, and like social issues that she has to deal with in her day-to-day life. And I thought it was very smart and very funny, and for such a short book, I think it's worth a try. So maybe start with that one if you don't know where to start from with Zadie Smith, and see if that makes you want to read more of her. I think that would be an interesting way to go about it. And then I normally finish these videos with a book that I want to read from that decade, and in this case apparently it's the non-fiction decade. So the book I want to read is The Warmth of Other Sun by Isabel Wilkerson. This is about race in America, as far as I know, in the US. Isabel Wilkerson recently released Cast, which is another non-fiction about how racism in the US can be equated to the caste system in other places like India, but also like how the Nazis treated Jews and things like that. And yeah, I read that book and I really loved it, so I think that it would be interesting to go back into her backlist and read The Warmth of Other Suns as well. Let me know if you have read it or if you want to read it. And let me know if your thoughts in any of the other books I have discussed today. And if you have any recommendations from backlisted books from the 2010s, that would be great too. I hope you enjoyed this video, and until next one, bye!